Hello, everybody, and welcome into episode number 153 of the Bible 2021 podcast. We are reading Daniel chapter 6 today, and our focus is on how can we have peace in the middle of trouble. And we are reading that famous story, Daniel in the Lion's Den. So we are a daily, roughly 10-minute podcast, maybe a little bit less over the next couple of weeks, and probably a little bit more after that. But we dig into one chapter of the Bible a day. Twice a week we're in the Old Testament, like today and tomorrow. 5 days a week we're in the New Testament. Welcome aboard to new listeners in Poland, in Spain, in Meghalaya, India, Uttar Pradesh, India, Salinas, California, Champaign, Illinois, and Hutchinson, Kansas. Quite a wide variety there. Thank you all for listening. I want to point you to our website, Bible2021.com. You can contact us there with questions, comments, etc. Bible2021.com. We also have a full transcript of every episode. So back to the Old Testament today. One of the most well-known Bible stories out there, and for good reason. Daniel in the Lion's Den is a fantastic story and an even better testimony to God's faithfulness. As we've mentioned before, Daniel is a spiritual giant, a man of great integrity that was certainly a sinner, but was never charged with a sin in the Bible, so to speak. And as far as we know, he lived a life of faithfulness without any sort of scandal. Indeed, even the Babylonians struggled to find any sort of issue to charge Daniel with. Verse 4 of Daniel 6 says, "The administrators and satraps kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom, but they could find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him." Hey, that's a wonderful testimony. And you might say, oh, well, it's the Bible. Of course, the Bible is going to be biased towards the characters that are in the Bible, except you would never say that if you've actually read the Bible, because the Bible is anything but biased towards the characters that are in there. The Bible pretty much is really clear about all the sins and shortfallings of our great, quote, heroes of the faith. Well, without commentary, let's read our chapter and savor the faithfulness of God. This is Daniel chapter 6, verse 1 in the Christian Standard Bible. Darius decided to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, stationed throughout the entire realm, and over them 3 administrators, including Daniel. These satraps would be accountable to them so that the king would not be defrauded. Daniel distinguished himself above the administrators and satraps because he had an extraordinary spirit, so the king planned to set him over the whole realm. The administrators and satraps, therefore, kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom, but they could find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Then these men said, "We'll never find a charge against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God." So the administrators and satraps went together to the king and said to him, "May King Darius live forever. All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days, anyone who petitions any man or god except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den. Therefore, your majesty, establish the edict and sign the document so that, as a law of the Medes and Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed." So King Xerxes signed the written edict. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house. The windows in his upstairs room opened towards Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God, so they approached the king and asked about his edict. "Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any person who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "As a law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable." Then they replied to the king, "Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day." As soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased. He set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. Then these men went together to the king and said to him, "You know, your majesty, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no edict or ordinance the king establishes can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. Then the king went to the palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel. "Daniel, servant of the living God," the king said, "has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Then Daniel spoke with the king. "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they haven't harmed me. For I was found innocent before him, and also before you, your majesty. I have not done harm." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. The king then gave the command, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den, they, their children, and their wives. They had not touched the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to those of every people, nation, and language who lived on the whole earth, "May your prosperity abound. I issue a decree that in all my royal dominion people must tremble in fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth, for he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So let's repeat that verse we just read, verse 23. We're going to read it 3 times today, and for good reason. Daniel 6:23, the king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. Now notice how Daniel had peace even when he was in the lion's den. How is that kind of peace possible? Well, primarily it comes from fully trusting in God. Here's Pastor Tony Evans pointing us to that peace in his own inimitable style. Pastor Tony says, "What's the definition of peace? Peace is not happy feelings. You know you can get a pill and it will make you happy. You can go out and go to the movies or something, or go to a comedy. They'll make you laugh, and maybe you'll forget about your problems for a while, but that's the superficial stuff. That's like saccharin. It's a cheap substitute. It's not the real thing. It's just a covering, a coating. There's nothing incomprehensible about that. You can understand it. That's not what's being talked about when the Bible talks about peace. 2 painters one time were in a contest, and they were told to paint a picture of peace. One painter painted a sunset with the sun going down over the calm water, and everything was just nice and slow and had a kind of calming effect. It was a nice picture, but the other painter painted a picture of a storm. The sky was dark, and there was lightning, and there was thunder, and there was clouds, dark clouds rolling all over. Waves were crashing against the rocks, and things were chaotic. And in the corner of the painting, at the very bottom, were 2 big stones with a bird in the middle singing. That's peace. Peace is when you're still singing and the storm hasn't died down. It's still thundering. It's still lightning, but you're still singing. You know why? Because what God does when he gives you peace is like giving you an umbrella in the middle of the storm. You pull out your umbrella, that doesn't stop the rain. You pull out your umbrella, that doesn't stop the lightning, but you pull out your umbrella and it does keep you from getting wet. That's peace. Peace is where God's calm and God's tranquility overrule your concerns. That's peace. Oh, if there were somebody here that testified, if there was somebody that could come here today and give a testimony, I'd call Hannah from the Bible, because in 1 Samuel 1, she was worried that she couldn't give birth to a son, and the Bible says that she threw herself before God, and she looked like a drunk woman. She was so broken by her situation of infertility, and she threw herself praying before God, and before she ever got the blessing of a baby, it says after she threw herself before God, it says she got up and her sadness went away. Or I'd call Daniel to testify, because if Daniel was here this morning, he would tell you that they passed an edict, and that edict said if you pray to any god except Darius for the next 30 days, you're going to be thrown into the lion's den. And Daniel went home, and with his shutters open, he got down and prayed like he always did, giving thanks. When they found out, they threw him in the lion's den, but this is what it says about it. It says that while he was in the lion's den, he was at rest, but the king who threw him in there could not sleep all night long. That's what I like. That's a testimony. That's peace that passes all understanding. Well, indeed, let's close with our Bible memory verse for the month of June. Happy June, by the way. Daniel 6:23. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the lion's den. When Daniel was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. May we also trust in our God. Good day to you, friends, and Godspeed.